afternoon, everyone. Just find a seat for the last people. That's great. My name's Jackie Costello. It's my pleasure to chair our afternoon session. We have 4 speakers for this open session, and our first one, if you'd like to come to the stage, Tara Lale. Tara's topic is Transforming Struggle into Strength, a peer-led model for post-traumatic growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. I'm sure you've all heard enough of my voice already. So welcome to this presentation, Transforming Struggle into Strength, a peer-led model for post-traumatic growth. So I wanted to start with this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. Most people are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus flower without the mud. And this quote really speaks to the underlying philosophy which underpins post-traumatic growth and the journey of post-traumatic growth. So I wanted to start with a little bit about my old story. So this is my family growing up in the 70s, which you can probably tell from the A-frame skirt. My mother and my father was Indian, my mother was English, and my elder brother Adam and my sister Joanna, who was the oldest. And I thought I had a pretty normal childhood. I did realize at some point that my father was not well. He used to sit in his chair and he loved reading, but when he wasn't well, he didn't even have a book on his lap. And I'd kind of go to him and say, Dad, can I have a cuddle? And he'd just close his eyes and say, not now, lovey, Daddy's resting. And I didn't understand why he wasn't able to love me in the way that I wanted or felt that I needed, and he wasn't able to hug me. My mother was the one who really kept our family together, but when I was 8, she was diagnosed with cancer. And I really saw during that time that they were both ill, my father's psychological illness and my mother's physical illness, how they both had times in hospital, they both had times when they couldn't work because of their illnesses, and how it impacted their relationship and our family. But when I was 13, she died from cancer, and that was the first time that I felt this sense of maybe the world isn't safe, and this sense of loss. And my father had quite a severe psychotic episode just after she died, and he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where he stayed for the best part of a year. And so essentially I had lost both parents at the age of 13. My brother was 15, my sister was 17. And I didn't know how to grieve at that point. I went back to school and nobody really spoke to me. And I kind of hoped that we'd all kind of unite in our grief, but we didn't, and we weren't able to. But I turned towards my brother, and he was the rock. We just had this unspoken bond, and we really trusted and loved each other. And he was the person that gave me some sense of stability in the world, and a sense that I mattered. And he was very good looking. He was a straight A student, and all the boys wanted to be like him, and all the girls wanted to be with him. And he went to Oxford University, and during his first term at Oxford University, he took his own life. And that was really the moment that my whole world fell apart, and I didn't know how to exist in the world anymore. Everything that I knew and loved had been taken from me. And I wrote in a letter to a friend 6 months after my brother died, I don't want to die, but I don't know how to live. And that's exactly how it felt to me. And that picture of the ground breaking beneath me was exactly how it felt. There was nothing stable and no solid foundation for which I could exist in the world. So what is post-traumatic growth? So it was a term coined by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun in the mid-1990s. And it came from them hearing hundreds and hundreds of stories of people talking about their experiences of trauma, originally parents talking about the loss of children. And they kept seeing these patterns, and they came up with this definition, that post-traumatic growth is the positive psychological changes that can be experienced as a result of the struggle that occurs in the aftermath of traumatic or highly challenging circumstances. And those words, as a result of the struggle, are so, so important. So I wanted to dispel some of the myths around post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth is not just an outcome. And the growth people often think that the growth comes from the event itself. People often think that experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth is actually a contradiction. And people think that post-traumatic growth is a new type of therapy. So what we know is that post-traumatic growth is both a process and an outcome. It's about the way that we make meaning from our experiences. And the growth comes from the struggle to accommodate those experiences within our existing frameworks of meaning, and whether we call them schema or global meaning or worldviews, it's the struggle to accommodate them and the incredibly distressing emotions and feelings that come up as a result of that. Post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth can actually coexist. So people can still be experiencing the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but they can also experience growth at the same time. And the emphasis with post-traumatic growth is on facilitation, not on intervention. So it's not a new type of therapy. But it is an integrative approach, and it draws on several existing approaches and models of trauma. So it draws on cognitive behavior, it draws on interpersonal therapy and skills and research, it draws on existential and narrative theory. So all these different approaches, which we know from lots and lots of research, are important in helping people heal from trauma. It's not what's wrong, it's what happened. And these are really important words because it speaks to a change and changing our perspective from a pathogenic perspective. So traditionally, our medical models have arisen out of this kind of pathogenic approach that something is wrong and then we need to fix the person. But post-traumatic growth really shifts towards looking at what happened to you and to move even beyond what happened to you to how do I make meaning from what happened to me. And so it requires, post-traumatic growth came from what we call a salutogenic approach, which means we looks at what are the origins of health. What some of Aaron Antonovsky's work in the 70s took this salutogenic approach as why is it and how is it that some people are able to move through highly stressful and traumatic events and still be well. So there's just a graph here that sort of explains the difference between post-traumatic growth and resilience. And again, resilience is complicated because we don't have a standardized definition of what resilience is. In its most simplest form, people will talk about bouncing back to your original level of well-being. But post-traumatic growth is going beyond where we were, the level of functioning that we had prior, to a level of functioning and well-being that is greater than what it was previously. And I've put in that challenge to core beliefs there as, so for me, I've put in 1988, the year that my brother died, that was when my whole core belief system and the way that I understood the world was shattered. And that draws on some of Jana Spoolman's work, if you're familiar with that, around shattered assumptions. But we also now know that there doesn't have to be one significant defining event. There can actually be an accumulation of events over time that leads to this challenge to core beliefs. But it is the challenge to core beliefs that is really pivotal and important in post-traumatic growth. And if you look down there at 2009, and I talk about a turning point and unraveling, and for me that happened when I turned out to a job as a firefighter where somebody had taken their own life, and they had taken their own life in the same way that my brother had taken his own life. And I had a really visceral reaction to that. It wasn't a bad scene as compared to some of the scenes that I've seen as a firefighter, but I felt that I was going to vomit. And I felt it through my entire body. And at the same time, I had the breakdown of a relatively short relationship. It was a 6-month relationship, but I had a huge reaction to that. And I couldn't understand why I had this huge reaction. And I think that was the point when I remember waking up in the middle of the night and I was just crying and crying and crying. And at some point it came over me and I went, actually, this is just old pain, Tara. This is old pain. It's not a result of this. And that sent me on that journey to try and learn to struggle well. So that graph makes it look like a beautiful linear process. But what struggle, as we all know, actually looks and feels like it is really messy. So how did I go from that very anxious, incredibly shy child, grief-stricken child, I had panic attacks, I couldn't look anybody in the eye, to that was just before I retired from Foreign Rescue New South Wales last year as a uniformed firefighter. And we continue on that journey of growth, and there were many things, even last year, that the one thing that we know, the one certainty, is that we will all struggle. The certainty in life, we will all struggle at some point. And even last year, I had a whole lot of life events that happened at the same time. I had a total hip replacement. My career ended against my choice. And my father died on the same day that I had that surgery. And absolutely, I struggled. I lay down flat and I thought, how am I going to get back up? But because I had learned how to struggle well, it enabled me to grow through those experiences. But what I really want to know is the time frame between when that event happened, 1988, and 2009. So that's 30 years. And so some of the programs I'm going to talk about is how can we condense that period of time so people don't live for such a long period of time in the distress and the inability to grow through their experiences. So there are 5 domains of post-traumatic growth that have been identified. There's now the post-traumatic growth inventory, which is a reliable and valid scale that has been used to measure post-traumatic growth. So a deepening relationship to others, an increased sense of personal strength, an appreciation of life, both the big and the small things, new possibilities which evolve through our experiences, and a deepening sense of spirituality and existential change. So what's my news story? So I published my book in 2015, and it was translated into French, into Mandarin, and went into second edition in 2020. I represented Australia as a 48-year-old, and that's significant because I didn't achieve that when I was far stronger and far fitter than I was then. That's a little cameo appearance I made with Thor, also known as Chris Hemsworth on Limitless, with my sister, Jo, who lives in the UK still, but she came over when I was awarded my AFSM, and that was at Government House. And one of the things that has fundamentally changed in our relationship since I wrote my story down and since I went on that journey of struggle is that our relationship is so much better than it ever was before. I then cycled across Australia in 2021 and raised over $20,000 for Lifeline. And that was me with my beautiful dog Nelson, because he has to come into everything. And he was acknowledged in my PhD, holding a hard copy of my thesis, which looked at the impact of suicide on firefighters. And the reason why I show this is not to say how great I am, but to say every single one of those things happened because of what happened, not in spite of it. And that is really, really significant. So struggle is a powerful force for change, and how we struggle matters. So how do we help empower people with the skills to struggle well? So this is a roadmap to post-traumatic growth, and it is founded, at the very heart of this roadmap is building trust and connection. And how can we do that? We can do that by educating people on signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress, of what trauma is, what it does to us, but also letting them know that this thing called post-traumatic growth does exist as well. We have to teach people the skills of regulation. How do we regulate our emotions? And that is so important to be able to go on this journey of growth, and using all of these skills that we know are important at work: mindfulness, grounding techniques, breathing, meditation, gratitude, journaling, all of those things that we know are really important wellness practice and help us to regulate our emotions, going into nature, being connected to nature. Disclosure. Disclosure is such an important part of the piece of building those stronger relationships and that sense of trust and connection. So how do we allow people to disclose their stories in a safe and trusted environment with somebody that can hear them? And how do we equally teach people how to listen well? So how do we teach people to listen with an open heart instead of listening with their head? And all of those things are such powerful forces for connection. We know that every fundamental human need is the need to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. And when we teach people those skills, we enable them to be well and to grow through their experiences. And that comes around to story. We know that story is so, so important to understand our old story so that we can be present with our current story, but so we can integrate our past, our present, and our future. And we can then re-script our future story. And when I wrote my book, I didn't realize what I was doing, but essentially I was doing that. I was making sense of my old story through writing so that I could re-script my new story and my new narrative. And that word integration is so fundamental to post-traumatic growth. And service. So we know that service personnel, military and first responder personnel, they go into jobs to be of service. So how can we pay that forward so that people are still of service when they go home, when they're no longer connected to an organisation, so that they bring those skills back to their families, to their colleagues, and to their community to continue to be of service to all those people. So there's a concept called expert companionship, which is also fundamental to post-traumatic growth, and it's a way to facilitate post-traumatic growth. It recognises that there may be other people in the lives of trauma survivors who provide the kind of companionship that encourages post-traumatic growth. And that's so important because we know clinicians a lot of people don't ever get to clinical care. But who are the people and how do we provide people with the skills to be there and to hold people in an everyday moment? It builds on some of the principles of good clinical practice. Some of it came from Carl Rogers' work, such as therapeutic relating and listening. Individuals trained in providing expert companionship are referred to as expert guides. And an expert guide is someone who can walk beside us in our struggle, who we can learn from by sharing their experiences. And that sense of shared experience is so, so important to feeling seen, feeling understood, and feeling supported. So the principles are respect. They are taking the position of a humble learner as an expert guide and supports the shaping of a new narrative together that respects the horror of what happened whilst opening areas of change and encouraging an appreciation of the paradox of the trauma experience. And again, that is so important to, in a way, for us, enable us to hold both the dark and the light at the same time. So the Boulder Crest model. Boulder Crest is an organisation, not-for-profit organisation in the US. It is founded on the science of post-traumatic growth. They are peer-led models, they are non-pharmacological, and they are post-traumatic growth-oriented. And most importantly, they are culturally contextualised, so very, very contextualised to the military and first responder organisational culture and ways of being and existing, which we know makes us different in how we exist in the world when we've been in those roles for any significant amount of time. So all the expert guides are veterans or former first responders who have walked their own paths of struggle, again, which speaks to that shared experience and that shared sense of understanding. So Warrior Path. So the PATH stands for Progressive and Alternative Training for Helping Heroes. And I was so fortunate enough to go with my colleagues up at the back there, Matt and Narelle, and Mark and Colin, who isn't here, to actually go and experience Warrior Path. We were there at the end of January this year, just a month ago. It is a 90-day program, but it's a gendered program as well, and it begins with a 7-day intensive, which we undertook in America. And the follow-up includes 5-team video conference sessions. It's supported by the Warrior Path app. So far, 4,281 service personnel have completed the program. And there's now some data coming out. There's been, so that 58%, they've shown a 58% reduction in post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms and a 58% increase in post-traumatic growth scores. There's actually a whole battery of measures that they use, but I've just picked out a couple of those. But it shows that there is a very longitudinal study by Rhodes et al. That was just published very recently that's shown that the program is effective, not just at helping people with sustained growth, but also at reducing the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And that just speaks to some of those pictures that are real there from some of the amazing attention to detail that they have. I could not believe it wasn't so much about any particular one practice that they used, it was the way that it was put together that literally changed people's lives. And it made me, and I know all my colleagues at the back of the room there, go, we have to do that here. There is also what's called the Struggle Well program, which is a different, so Warrior Path is more geared towards kind of people transitioning out of service or ex-serving members. The Struggle Well is a preventative approach for first responders and defence units, and it's more of a cultural change initiative. The objectives are to normalise struggle and to democratise the ability to struggle well. So it really looks at how do we change our language around mental health and mental ill health so that struggle is normalised. And some of those pictures are from Tucson Police Department, which I'll talk about in a minute in the case study that they use. So they really have implemented and taken on board all this in their everyday ways of operating as an organisation. It's a series of 1-, 2-, and 5-day workshops and supported by the Struggle Well app. There is a great video, which is, if you head afterwards straight outside the door, the Frontline Mental Health stand there, they have a code that you can scan and watch that video of how the Tucson Police Department have implemented it in their organisation. So far, 30,000 people have gone through Struggle Well to date. And I'm so excited that following this initiative, and it was really by chance that myself and Matt and Narelle and we were talking, and I said, have you heard of Boulder Crest? And they were like, yes, we're looking at that too. And then it was like, right, we're going to go over there and see what they're doing. So we are now planning. Warrior Path is really a dream for the future for us to implement. I think it's so needed, especially in light of the Royal Commission into Veteran Suicide. We know that veterans struggle so much as ex-serving first responders, but we need a huge injection for funding for that. So that's the dream in the future. But at the moment, we are implementing Struggle Well, and we are looking to implement it in police, fire, paramedics, organisations, defence units within Australia moving forward. Which is a really exciting partnership between Boulder Crest, Frontline Mental Health, and with myself. So for more information, if you head to the Boulder Crest website on bouldercrest.org, strugglewell.org gives you all the information, the data that they've collected so far, which is interestingly showing changes in retention for police departments, it's showing reduced sick leave, it's showing increased access to healthcare. So one really important thing that I didn't mention is this model is designed to run in tandem with clinical models. So it's not saying we don't need anything. It's like going, yes, do get help, but they can run in tandem. For any of you that are clinicians, there's a post-traumatic growth certification for mental health professionals, which is 12 hours, and that's on the Boulder Crest website. So please do head to that. I just want to finish. Am I out of time? Sorry. I didn't even look at you. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Anyway, I wanted to leave you with this quote. What I know for sure is that everything that has happened to you was also happening for you. And all that time, in all of those moments, you were building strength. Strength times strength times strength equals power. What happened to you can be your power. And I think that speaks to the journey of post-traumatic growth. Thank you so much.